If you grew up in the 70s, you remember the thrill of hearing that bionic sound. Watching Steve Austin race across the screen in slow motion and seeing him take on enemies who seemed bigger, stronger, and sometimes downright unbelievable. Today, we're stepping back into that world, revisiting some of the opponents who pushed the $6 million man to his limits and left an unforgettable mark on classic TV history. If you're a fan of the show, you won't want to miss what's coming up, because, frankly,
it's wild!
During the early years of the $6 Million Man, Dr. Wells is Missing probably stands out as one of the rare episodes where Steve Austin is genuinely pushed to his limits. Not by a superhuman or a robot, but by ordinary men working together. In this story, Dr. Rudy Wells is kidnapped by the wealthy Tuchelli crime family, who want to force him to build their own bionic man. It was also a noteworthy episode because it marked Alan Oppenheimer's first appearance as Rudy in the weekly series, giving the character more screen time than usual. When Steve follows Rudy's trail to an old castle in Austria, he's captured and thrown into what amounts to a brutal test of strength. The Tuchellis decide to evaluate his abilities by forcing him through a gauntlet of hand-to-hand combat. One attacker enters the courtyard, then another, and then another. Steve handles them easily at first, hurling them across the courtyard like rag dolls. Then, one opponent changes the game. A henchman named Yamo displays impressive strength by pulling a steel light post right out of the ground and using it as a weapon, striking Steve's bionic arm and damaging it.
Yamo, you broke it!
With multiple men rushing him at once, Steve is finally overwhelmed. One of the very few moments in the entire series when teamwork and strategy actually bring down the Bionic Man. Sharp-eyed fans have noticed a few production quirks during this battle. At one point, you can briefly see the cable used to yank a stuntman backward through the snow, and the signature Bionic sound effect is accidentally used for Yamo, even though he's supposed to be just a normal man. The episode also takes a surprisingly dark turn during a mountain car chase. Cornered by armed pursuers, Steve shoves their vehicle off the road and over a cliff, ending the threat in a fiery explosion. It's one of the very rare moments where Steve actually kills his opponents, something the show would later avoid once it became a favorite among younger viewers. In the end, when Steve and Yamo face each other again, one-on-one, Steve easily defeats him, even with his bionic arm still damaged. During the fight, he mixes in sharp, disciplined strikes from his human left arm, proving he's more than just circuitry and strength. And he ultimately ends the fight with a decisive bionic kick that drops Yamo instantly. But it was that brief moment in the snowy courtyard, when the great Steve Austin was actually beaten, that makes it one of the most memorable fights in the entire series. Sometimes Steve Austin's most dangerous opponents weren't villains at all. They were victims of scientific experiments gone horribly wrong. In The Pioneers, scientists David Tate, played by Mike Farrell, and Nicole Simmons, portrayed by Joan Darling, are conducting a top-secret OSI experiment in space, testing a cell regeneration serum designed to help cryogenically frozen patients recover safely. But when their space capsule crashes in Minnesota, David is accidentally injected with far too much of the serum. The overdose transforms him into a raging, animalistic force with superhuman strength. David begins terrorizing the countryside, attacking campers and locals while suffering from explosive bursts of rage he can no longer control. Steve is called in to track him down, leading to a tense confrontation near a pond. When the two finally clash, it becomes clear that David's serum-enhanced strength rivals Steve's bionic power. During their brutal fight, David rams Steve with a wooden beam, sending him flying into the pond. The battle continues, and David then strikes Steve's bionic arm with a steel beam, damaging it, reminiscent of what happened in the episode Dr. Wells is Missing. The battle ends tragically when David is shot and dies from his bullet wounds, leaving Oscar Goldman to question the moral cost of scientific progress and whether the pursuit of advancement is worth the lives lost. It's a rare episode where Steve isn't simply a hero stopping a danger. He's a fellow survivor of science gone too far, doing his best to save someone who never asked for superhuman power. Few enemies on the $6 Million Man were as instantly iconic or as terrifying as the robotic duplicate of Major Frederick Sloan in Season 1's Day of the Robot. For many fans who grew up in the 1970s, this episode was the stuff of playground legend. The story begins when Steve is assigned to accompany his old friend, Major Frederick Sloan, played by John Saxon, to a military installation where a secret missile defense system is being tested. But early in the episode, Sloan is kidnapped at a gas station and replaced with an identical robot created by the brilliant but unstable Dr. Chester Dolans, portrayed by Henry Jones. The real Sloan is taken prisoner, while the robot, remotely controlled from Dolans' laboratory, calmly takes his place. At first, Steve senses that something is off. Sloan's personality seems different. His driving is reckless, and he reacts strangely when Steve uses his bionic strength to free their car from a ditch. When the robot unknowingly lifts the car with its own superhuman strength, Steve realizes he's dealing with something far beyond normal human capabilities. The truth finally comes to light in a dramatic showdown at a high-security testing facility. What follows is one of the longest and most intense fight scenes in the entire series, nearly 8 minutes of heavy, slow-motion combat as Steve battles a machine that can match him blow for blow. The robot is relentless, feeling no pain and showing no hesitation. It slams Steve with enough force to injure his left arm, leaving Steve to fight with one arm partially disabled. One detail that adds to the eerie atmosphere is the robot's distinctive sound effect, a metallic, warbling tone that really stood out from the rest of the episode's audio design. This sound wasn't created specifically for the $6 Million Man. It was actually recycled from the 1971 Don Knotts film, How to Frame a Fig. At one point, Steve manages to tear off part of the robot's face, revealing a horrifying array of exposed circuitry, flashing lights, and cold mechanical components beneath the human exterior. The image burned itself into the minds of a generation of young viewers, many of whom would later recognize the design as the inspiration for Kenner's Maskatron action figure, even though the term Maskatron was never used in the episode. Day of the Robot is also historically important for the series. The Bionic sound effect had appeared before, but not consistently. Day of the Robot helped solidify its use, especially during the robot's movements, shaping the sound that would later become synonymous with Steve's bionics. In the end, Steve defeats the robot by impaling it with a steel girder, a brutal finish to one of his most memorable and evenly matched fights. The episode's blend of science fiction, action, and unsettling imagery cemented it as one of the most unforgettable entries in the entire series. Dr. Chester Dolans may have failed the first time he tried to defeat Steve Austin with a robot, but he wasn't discouraged. In Return of the Robot Maker, he returns with a far more dangerous plan, a fully upgraded android built to impersonate Oscar Goldman. Dolans is proud of how far he's come since his first failed design. This new model is built to imitate Oscar down to the smallest human detail. The role is once again played by Henry Jones, whose polite, soft-spoken delivery makes Dolans' genius and lack of conscience even more unsettling. The scheme unfolds when the OSI receives an urgent assignment involving the high-security Brahmin Institute. Steve believes he's getting his orders directly from Oscar, but viewers already know the truth. The real Oscar has been kidnapped, and Dolans' android double has stepped into his place. Steve soon notices strange behavior. The clearest early sign is subtle but unnerving. Oscar casually downs a scalding hot cup of coffee without reacting at all. From there, the inconsistencies pile up, and suspicion begins to grow. As the fake Oscar drives Steve toward increasingly dangerous actions, Steve uncovers the truth and finds the real Oscar held captive. This leads to the episode's intense confrontation, Steve forced to battle a machine wearing the face of the man he trusts most. The android hits with machine-level force, and the fight, though shorter than the Sloan robot brawl, is brutal and unsettling. It ends with one of the most decisive finishes in the series. Steve decapitates the android with a single bionic chop to the back of the neck. Richard Anderson sells the tension perfectly, playing the robot Oscar with just enough stiffness and emotional flatness to make the imitation feel wrong. Return of the Robot Maker stands out because the threat isn't just strength, it's betrayal by something that looks familiar. In Steve Austin's world, Even a trusted face can't always be believed. If you watched The $6 Million Man during its original run, you probably remember the surprise twist in the episode The $7 Million Man. When Steve meets Barney Miller for the first time, the encounter seems harmless, until the two sit down for a friendly arm wrestling match. With one sudden burst of power, Barney slams Steve's arm down so hard that he breaks the table in half. It's a jarring moment for both Steve and the audience, revealing that this stranger isn't just strong, he's actually stronger than the $6 Million Man. The character of Barney Miller was played by Monty Markham. Interestingly, the $6 Million Man was based on the novel Cyborg by Martin Caidin, who originally wanted Monty Markham to play Steve Austin. When the project moved from page to television, the producers ultimately chose Lee Majors. That bit of history gives this episode an unexpected twist by offering fans a glimpse of the Steve Austin the series might have had. In the story itself, Oscar reveals that Rudy Wells has secretly completed a second Bionic project, this one costing $7 million and producing a man even stronger than Steve. Barney Miller, a former race car driver, has all the physical advantages, but none of Steve's emotional discipline. Once Oscar officially pairs Steve and Barney on a mission, the problems become impossible to ignore. Where Steve uses his abilities with precision, Barney charges in recklessly, overwhelmed by the intensity of his new strength and speed. Underneath the bravado, Barney begins to feel something Steve recognizes all too well, a sense that he's no longer fully human. But unlike Steve, who adapted to his bionics with discipline and humility, Barney spirals emotionally. He talks about feeling different, replaced, and not knowing where the man ends and the enhancements begin. The bionics were meant to save him, but to Barney, they start to feel like an invasion. When Steve suggests that they might need to reduce Barney's power levels so he can handle the psychological strain, Barney believes that the OSI wants to limit him, control him, or even replace him. That fear curdles into paranoia, and paranoia turns into a dangerous idea. If he destroys the original Bionic blueprints, as well as Steve, he will become the only Bionic man the OSI can rely on. When Barney finally snaps and breaks into the OSI facility to destroy the Bionic blueprints, Steve is forced to confront him deep inside the secure vault area. That leads to the series' first major Bionic versus Bionic showdown, as Steve must stop a man who isn't just enhanced like he is, but actually stronger. The sequence remains one of the most memorable early action scenes in the series. Barney's raw strength is undeniable, but Steve's experience and control ultimately allow him to overpower him. There's also a fun piece of TV history attached to this episode. When it aired on ABC in November 1974, the character's name was indeed Barney Miller. But just 2 months later, ABC premiered a new sitcom, also titled Barney Miller, and it became an instant hit. To avoid confusion, the Bionic character's name was changed to Barney Hiller when he returned in the later episode The Bionic Criminal. That episode featured a rematch with Steve that was surprisingly short and anticlimactic compared to their first showdown. If there's one episode that truly defined the $6 Million Man for an entire generation, it's The Secret of Bigfoot. Airing in 1976 as a 2-part event, it became one of the most watched stories in the show's history. Not just because Steve Austin fought Bigfoot, but because of what that fight revealed. The story begins when 2 geologists disappear in the California mountains while placing earthquake sensors. Their disappearance leads Steve into the forest, where he encounters a massive, Sasquatch-like creature, played by Andre the Giant. This towering opponent isn't just frightening, he's one of the few beings strong enough to go toe-to-toe with Steve. Their confrontation remains one of the moments fans never stopped talking about. Bigfoot tears down trees, swats Steve aside with effortless force, and shrugs off attacks that would flatten any human opponent. At one point, Steve lands a full bionic punch squarely into Bigfoot's chest, a blow that normally sends enemies flying, but it has no effect at all. For the first time, Steve is facing someone who can absorb his strongest hits without even flinching. And then comes the moment that delivers the shocking reveal the episode is famous for. During the struggle, Steve manages to grab Bigfoot's right arm and rips it completely off. Instead of flesh, the shoulder erupts in sparks, wiring, and mechanical joints. This is the truth behind the legend. Bigfoot isn't a wild creature at all, but a neosynthetic being, a cybernetic organism engineered by an advanced extraterrestrial race living inside a hidden mountain complex. Their technology surpasses even Steve's bionics, and Bigfoot is revealed to be a fusion of alien engineering and organic strength. Even the production details behind Bigfoot added to the creature's mystique. The white contact lenses used to give his eyes their eerie, inhuman appearance were so striking that they were later reused for the Hulk in the Incredible Hulk TV series. And the plaster footprint cast shown on screen is the real deal, an actual cast of Andre the Giant's size 24 foot. According to producer Kenneth Johnson, the heel was extended a few inches for dramatic effect, but the rest was left untouched, making it one of the most authentic props in the series. Bigfoot's return in the Season 4 premiere delivers one of the most shocking moments in Steve Austin's entire run. A fight that's far shorter than their original battle, but far more dangerous. In Return of Bigfoot, Part 1, the creature, now played by Ted Cassidy, is under the control of a renegade alien faction, and their influence turns him from guardian to weapon. When Steve confronts Bigfoot, he is knocked unconscious and falls underneath a hydraulic press, which ruptures the nuclear power cells inside his bionic legs, exposing him to a lethal dose of radiation. This moment sets off the cross-series cliffhanger as the Bionic Woman takes over the story. Jamie Summers becomes Steve's only hope for survival, leading to the alien neotraxin treatment that ultimately pulls him back from the brink in Part 2. If Bigfoot was Steve Austin's most memorable opponent, then the Death Probe was his most unstoppable. Premiering in 1977 as a two-part event, this storyline introduced an adversary unlike anything Steve or the audience had ever seen. A robotic juggernaut that even the $6 million man could not scratch. The crisis begins when a Soviet space probe, built with experimental super-dense alloy designed to survive the extreme atmosphere of Venus, goes off course and crash lands in rural Wyoming. What emerges from the wreckage is a relentless, tank-like machine that moves with surprising speed, analyzes threats instantly, and shrugs off every weapon thrown at it, from small arms to heavy ordnance. And then comes Steve's direct confrontation with the machine, one of the most punishing one-on-one battles of the entire series. Steve unleashes his full bionic strength against the probe, striking it repeatedly, but the blows have no effect at all on its reinforced alloy shell. Before he can regroup, the probe's mechanical claw arm snaps shut on Steve's right arm, crushing his bionic limb and leaving it totally disabled. As Steve tries to flee, the probe escalates, firing a steel cable that cinches around him and drags him toward a spinning blade. It's a brief but brutal moment, and Steve barely tears free, forced to retreat because even his bionics aren't enough. Because the probe passed through Venus's crushing atmosphere, its interior became highly pressurized. In the end, Steve and the team destroy it by lifting it into the upper atmosphere, where the sudden drop in external pressure causes the overpressurized machine to explode. In Season 5, Steve takes on an upgraded version of the Death Probe, now armed with spinning blades on its front arms as well as a laser weapon. Steve once again falls victim to the same tactic used by the first probe. It snares his legs with a cable and drags him toward its rotating blades before he manages to break free. Ultimately, they are able to take advantage of a production flaw in its alloy to destroy the Death Probe by dropping it into a pit of hydrochloric acid. Now it's your turn. Who do you think was Steve Austin's toughest opponent? Did we miss a villain, a creature, or a moment that always stuck with you? Let us know in the comments. If this trip through Bionic history brought back some memories, tap like, hit subscribe, and share it with another fan. It helps our channel grow better, stronger, and yes, faster. Thanks for watching.